Welcome to Triple C Stories. Get ready for thrilling African folktales filled with wisdom, adventure, and unforgettable lessons. Don't just watch, like, share, and subscribe to keep these stories alive.
The Red Sea was not a place of mercy. Beneath the waves that tourists adored and the surface shimmer that poets romanticized, a darker world pulsed with ancient rhythm, a kingdom of salt and secrets. There, time did not pass in days or weeks but in ocean currents and moon cycles. In this underwater dominion ruled not by kings but by spirits older than stone, Princess Nkoli moved like the current itself, gentle at first glance, but capable of unspeakable force. Her presence stirred kelp forests to sway even in stillness, her eyes mirrored the ocean floor's endless blue, and her voice, rarely heard, could summon stingrays from miles away. She was a daughter of purpose, sculpted by duty, fed on silence, groomed to uphold the oldest covenant between sea and surface, the covenant of blood. In the coral court, where the walls were made of bone-colored shells and the throne shimmered with stardust pearls, Nkoli stood in silence with 5 other princesses. They were all chosen ones, guardians, harvesters, protectors of the sea's dominion. But only one would be called upon this cycle, and the sea had already decided. The high priestess of foam and flame stepped forward, her voice rolling like waves crashing on rocks. The surface is corrupt. The balance is disturbed. The Red Sea is hungry. Her eyes settled on Nkoli. You shall rise, princess. You shall retrieve the offering. Nkoli did not react outwardly. Inside, however, her chest pulsed with something unfamiliar. A quiet ache. Not fear, no, she was bred without that luxury, but something close. Something warm. Her gills fluttered under her skin. She bowed slowly, as was custom. I obey, she whispered, and the water vibrated in response. But as she swam back to her private shell chamber, the ceremonial robe trailing behind her like sea foam, she could not shake off the whisper in her heart. It had started as a thought months ago, a wondering, a hunger of her own. What did humans laugh about? Why did they cry so loudly? What was joy when it wasn't scripted into duty? She had heard of love from the older spirits, those who swam too close to the surface and never returned the same. They spoke of it like a sickness, a fever, a plague of longing. But what would it feel like, just for a moment, to want something for yourself? She sat before her sacred mirror, a slice of obsidian trapped inside a polished clam shell, and stared at her reflection. It shimmered faintly, showing not just her face but the flickering silhouette of land above. Light, smoke, movement. Just a glimpse, she whispered. Let me see for myself. The mirror remained still for a while. Then, a soft voice answered, one that belonged not to any priestess but to the sea itself. You have 1 month. Bring what is required. And remember, curiosity is the first betrayal. By the next moonfall, the preparations began. The journey to the surface was not simple, even for a royal. She was stripped of her tail, her limbs reshaped into human form through ancient sea chants. The pain was sharp, her skin peeled like boiled fish, her bones cracked and rebuilt in angles foreign to her kind. Her voice, the instrument of many underwater blessings, was muted into something softer, duller, more human. Her eyes were adjusted to light. Her breath was rewired. In the final hour, she stood naked and trembling at the edge of the ocean floor, her body fully formed but unsteady. The high priestess approached, draped in anemones and kelp. Do not love them, she warned in a hush. They are fleeting. They are weak. They will tempt you with warmth and infect you with noise. Kill what must be killed. Bring the right soul. And return. Nkoli nodded, though her heart trembled with a truth she dared not admit. She wanted to feel the weakness for herself. She was given a single token, a ring carved from shark bone, cold to the touch, that she was to wear until her task was complete. Once the sacrifice was accepted, the ring would dissolve, signaling her return to the sea. With no more words, she swam upward. The waters grew lighter. Her limbs kicked awkwardly. The surface, when it broke, greeted her not with sun but with storm, a hard, unyielding rain that felt like pebbles against her skin. She emerged near a deserted part of Lagos coast, her body trembling under the assault of weather and air. Lightning split the sky as she gasped, unused to the dryness in her lungs. Every breath was a fight. Every heartbeat felt like betrayal. Crawling up the shore on unsteady legs, she stumbled toward a road lit faintly by passing cars. She had nothing, no clothes, no money, no name. But the sea had prepared her in other ways. Her beauty was alarming, the kind that made strangers pause mid-step. Her silence, her stillness, drew attention without effort. A woman, perhaps out of pity or suspicion, found her slumped by a closed bar and called for help. "This girl no day all right oh," the woman murmured. "Where she even come from like this? See as she day look like water spirit." Nkoli, now assuming the human name Naya, was taken to a clinic, clothed in borrowed jeans and a faded t-shirt. She said little, just nodded at questions and blinked as though adjusting to the weight of land life. But as she lay on the thin mattress that night, listening to the dull hum of generators and the distant thump of music from the nearby clubs, she whispered to herself, "So this is the surface. This is the beginning." Outside her tiny window, the rain softened, and the ocean, now distant, sighed in approval. But inside her, something unexpected bloomed, not the hunger for blood, but a desire to stay. The air felt heavy on land, like wearing a second skin that didn't fit. Each breath Nkoli took tasted different, not of salt and movement, but of stillness and smoke. The human world was louder than she had imagined. Not just in sound, but in presence. The lights blinked constantly, the people walked as if chased by invisible tides, and the noise, the unbearable chatter, the honking of cars, the sharp cries of children and the constant hum of machinery, made her long for the silence of the sea. Her body, though molded in the image of a human, still struggled to adapt. Her legs trembled with each step. Her feet were raw from contact with concrete and dust. Her ears rang when someone laughed too loud. But she endured it all with a quiet dignity, because she knew she couldn't go back empty-handed. The sea had given her time and task, and now it watched from afar, waiting for blood. In her small room above a local salon, Nkoli, now Naya to the world, spent most of her time sitting at the window, observing. Below her, the world moved on tirelessly. A fruit vendor argued with a customer every morning at exactly 9. A group of schoolchildren ran past by noon, laughing with dirty uniforms and cracked sandals. At dusk, lovers walked by, holding hands, sometimes arguing, sometimes whispering soft things into each other's ears. At night, the streetlight flickered in and out, like a tired heartbeat. She noticed everything, the way humans touched one another, how they grieved in public, how their eyes lit up when speaking of love or heartbreak. The emotions ran so freely here. So different from the restraint of her underwater realm. She was drawn to their messiness, their lack of structure, their chaos. In the sea, emotion was contained, wrapped in ceremony and bound by rules. Here, it exploded out of mouths, hands, feet, dancing, crying, kissing. She found herself fascinated by even the smallest gestures, a mother brushing crumbs off her child's face, two strangers locking eyes across the street, a man playing a broken guitar for coins outside a food joint. Every interaction seemed soaked in feeling, even when it was casual. She began keeping a small notebook, a shell-colored one she had carried in a pouch tied to her waist when she crossed over. In it, she wrote questions, observations, and strange words she couldn't quite grasp yet. "Do they die with regret?" she wrote one night, watching a funeral procession pass under her window. "Why do they fear being alone?" she scribbled another morning after hearing a woman cry in the salon downstairs because her boyfriend hadn't called. She didn't understand it all, but she wanted to. And that scared her. Because each day she stayed longer than she should, she began to forget the sting of salt water on her skin. She still woke with her body covered in a light film of dampness, and her hair never quite dried. But she no longer looked at the sea with longing, only curiosity. And that, in the eyes of the sea, was dangerous. At night, her mirror glowed faintly on the wooden dresser beside her bed. When she stared into it, sometimes she saw flickers of the coven, their cold eyes, their disapproval, their reminders. "Do not forget the reason you were sent," the sea goddess would whisper. "This is not your world." But Nkoli no longer whispered back in fear. She listened silently and returned to her window. And on one particular night, her curiosity took her farther than she had gone before. She followed the pulse of music, rhythmic, pulsing like the tides, that came from a building a few streets away. There, nestled between a tailoring shop and a frozen food store, stood a club. Nothing about it seemed magical or extraordinary. Peeling posters, dim lighting, music that made the pavement shake, but Naya felt her chest stir as if something inside her had been waiting for this. She entered cautiously. Inside it was dim and hot, the air soaked in sweat and alcohol. People danced freely, bodies pressed against bodies, the floor pulsing like a living thing. Her senses were overwhelmed, her skin vibrating from the bass, her eyes trying to adjust to the darkness and the neon flashes. She stood near a wall, unnoticed. Just as she was about to turn and leave, unsure why she had come in the first place, the music changed. A slow, rhythmic beat echoed through the club. The lights dimmed further. And from the center of the crowd stepped a man. He wore a simple black shirt and torn jeans, but his presence swallowed the room. His name, as she would learn later, was Ogbonna. And when he moved, everything inside her changed. His body flowed with the music like water, each movement sharp yet effortless. He didn't perform, he became. His dance wasn't practiced, it was felt. It was joy. It was heartbreak. It was everything she didn't understand and everything she feared. People clapped and whistled, but Naya could only stare, frozen, her fingers gripping the hem of her shirt. Her heartbeat mimicked the music. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying. She didn't want to take his life. She wanted to understand it. She came again the next night. And the night after. She always stood in the same corner. She didn't drink. She didn't dance. She only watched. Sometimes Ogbonna danced, other times he just laughed with friends, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade wrapped in honey. He was light, not in skin but in spirit. He moved without heaviness, without fear. And slowly, he began to notice her too. At first, just a glance. Then a longer look. Then, a nod. By the fourth night, he walked up to her, wiping sweat from his forehead, smiling with the kind of ease that only came from those who had known pain. "You don't dance?" he asked, voice loud enough to be heard over the music. Naya blinked. "I don't know how," she said softly. He grinned. "That's not a good enough reason." She looked down, unsure how to respond. "You knew in town," he added. She nodded. "What's your name?" She hesitated. "Naya." He tilted his head. "Naya. I like that." She didn't smile, but something warm curled in her chest. I'm Ogbonna, he said, offering his hand. She looked at it, then shook it, her fingers cool and trembling in his warm grasp. It was the first time she'd touched someone on land. And it felt nothing like the sea. It felt like the beginning of a storm. The club felt different after that night. Every light seemed dimmer, every sound sharper, every glance more potent. For Naya, who had existed in the shadows for so long, who had drifted silently through human life like a ghost in borrowed skin, the small moment with Ogbonna had caused a ripple inside her, a disturbance far greater than she understood. She returned to the club not because she was following the tide of her task, but because she needed to feel that tremor again. Not the loud music, not the smoke or the laughter or the dancing, just his presence, the warmth in his voice, the gentleness in his smile. It wasn't that he was extraordinary in the way the sea understood power. Ogbonna wasn't a king, he didn't command lightning, he didn't cast spells. But there was something inside him that pulled her attention like the moon pulled at waves. He carried a light, not in his hands, but in the way he moved through the world, in the softness with which he treated others. He was kind in a way that felt heavy with sincerity, and Nkoli, trained in silence, hardened by responsibility, kindness was louder than any war drum. She did not try to approach him again. Not immediately. She stayed back in her same corner, ordered nothing, danced never. And yet, his eyes would find her in the crowd. A shared glance. A nod. A smile exchanged across distance. He wasn't chasing her, but he wasn't ignoring her either. That quiet rhythm, that unspoken connection, became the pulse of her nights. She began to notice details she hadn't before. The way he tied his shirt around his waist when he got tired of dancing. The way his eyes lingered on couples before looking away, as though he missed something he had never truly had. He laughed loudly with his whole chest, but when he sat alone, he slouched, not from laziness, but from invisible weight. Sometimes, when the club closed and the streets cleared, he stayed behind, dancing alone on the pavement, earbuds in, face to the sky. She followed him once, from a distance. Not with the intent to kill or mock, just to understand. He walked the same route every night, cut through a market square, past a rusted gate with peeling blue paint, then climbed up a set of stairs into a flat above a tailoring shop. On one of those nights, he stopped suddenly and turned. She ducked behind a kiosk, heart pounding, breath caught in her throat. He stared into the darkness for a moment, then smiled faintly and shook his head, muttering something to himself before going inside. She didn't follow again after that, not out of fear. She didn't know how to fear humans, but because she realized her gaze had changed. She wasn't looking at him as a target anymore. She was looking at him like a moon. Something unreachable, yet so painfully bright. The kind of light that shouldn't belong to one person. The kind of light her world didn't permit. She stopped offering blood to the sea. Not intentionally at first. Days simply passed. Time blurred. She meant to look for someone unworthy, someone empty, but her heart wasn't in it. She thought she could delay. She thought the goddess would understand. But the mirror in her room began to crackle faintly at night, static ripples across the surface, and soon it spoke again. Not a whisper this time, a cold, disappointed drawl. "You forget yourself," it said. "You forget the hunger of the sea." Nkoli knelt before it, the shell-colored notebook in her lap. "I have not forgotten," she said. "I am watching. I am learning. I am choosing carefully." A lie. She had already chosen. The goddess heard it too. The heart is not made for choice. Your task is not to feel. You are not a woman. You are the knife. Do not dull your edge in sentiment. That night, the room grew colder. The dampness of her skin stayed longer. Her legs ached. Her body felt heavier. The punishment was gentle, a reminder. But it would not stay gentle for long. The covenant was not built on kindness. It was built on sacrifice. Still, she didn't act. Couldn't. When she saw Ogbonna, when he greeted her now with a simple, "You came again," when he touched her shoulder gently to guide her through the crowd, when he asked if she'd like to walk with him after, she couldn't bring herself to think of him as the one. He was too alive. Too full of feeling. Too needed. And worse, he was beginning to care about her too. The night he invited her for suya, she didn't know what to expect. She thought he meant it in passing, like most humans say things they don't mean. But he waited for her at the club entrance, leaned against the wall with a hopeful look. "Hungry?" he asked. She nodded, because she didn't know how to say no to him anymore. They walked in silence, and he talked mostly. He told her about his childhood, raised by his mother and aunties, how dancing had been his escape when life grew too hard to hold. He spoke of losing his younger brother, of how no one in his family believed in the art that lived in his feet. "It's funny," he said, chewing slowly, "how the things that keep us alive are the things others mock the most." She listened with her full body. Her eyes never left his face. Her mind etched every word into her bones. When he asked about her, she told fragments, not lies, but not truths either. "I come from a place where emotion is hidden," she said. "Where duty is more important than dreams." He looked at her quietly for a moment. "Sounds lonely." She wanted to say yes. She wanted to say "you have no idea." But instead she looked at the stars and said, "It is quiet. Sometimes too quiet." He didn't push further. He just smiled and said, "Well, you're not alone tonight." She turned her face away, because her eyes were starting to burn with the salt of a sea she could no longer claim. The night returned with its usual shadows, but something in it felt different to Naya. The air held weight, like it was thick with salt she couldn't see. There was a subtle pressure on her chest that hadn't been there the day before, and the mirror in the corner of her room pulsed faintly, even when untouched. Her dreams had not been kind. They came not as images, but as presence. She was underwater again, not swimming freely, but trapped. Around her were faceless figures, hundreds of them, their outlines blurred like ink in water. They didn't move. They didn't reach for her. But their silence was heavier than sound. Their gaze, though they had no eyes, pressed into her with questions she couldn't answer. She woke with a sharp inhale, as though she'd been drowning in air. Sweat clung to her skin, but it was the familiar kind, the kind that never truly dried. The sea was calling again. Not with tenderness. Not with invitation. With expectation. She stood slowly, her legs trembling more than usual. Her body had begun to feel different. Not sick, but disjointed, like her limbs were beginning to forget they belonged on land. The skin on her back had started to tingle, and some mornings, her reflection flickered in the mirror like it wasn't entirely hers. She opened the window and stared at the horizon, hoping the ocean wouldn't rise, but knowing deep down it was already on its way. For hours, she wandered the streets with her hood up, fingers cold, heart disoriented. She didn't know what she was searching for, but she understood what needed to be done. She could no longer ignore the sea goddess. Delay was betrayal. The ache in her bones was no longer just guilt, it was punishment. Every step she took was a reminder that the sea had marked time, and it was slipping fast. She passed the same fruit seller she watched from her window each morning. The same street boy who tapped on windshields with wet rags. The same taxi drivers cursing at nothing in particular. The streets were unchanged, Yet they all looked different through her eyes. Like pieces of a dream that didn't belong to her anymore. She caught a glimpse of herself in a shop window and flinched. Her eyes didn't shine the way they used to. Her skin had dulled just slightly, enough to notice if you stared too long. She was fading. That night she returned to the sea, not to pray, not to beg, but to begin. The moon was hidden behind cloud banks, and the wind howled like something ancient had awoken. She walked barefoot into the water until it reached her knees, then pulled out the small coral blade she'd hidden beneath her scarf. The water rippled around her as if recognizing its mistress. She waited, watching the road, until she saw the one she had chosen. He was nothing like Ogbonna. That was the point. This man had sharp teeth and sharper words. She had watched him rob a drunk girl the night before, laughing as he disappeared into the alleys. There was no light in him. Only shadow. He followed her easily, responding to a single look. In the world Naya came from, that kind of simplicity was rare. In this one, it was a weapon. She led him to the water without a word. He followed like prey, already accepting the trap. He joked about the cold. Called her, fine girl with no fear. She said nothing. And when they were far enough from sight, deep enough that the waves would carry the sound away, she turned. He reached for her waist, expecting something else, but his hands never made it. The blade entered quick, just below the ribs, where the blood would rush fast and hard. He staggered, confused, eyes wide. But she didn't look away. She couldn't afford to. She held him as he sank, whispering old chants under her breath, ancient words she hadn't spoken since crossing over. When it was done, she retrieved what she needed, the blood, captured in a sacred shell she'd kept hidden in her satchel. It glowed faintly, warm in her palms. Her hands shook, not from grief, but from relief. She had done it. She had chosen. Not Ogbonna. Someone else. Someone unworthy. Someone safe. She climbed back onto the sand and knelt by a flat rock she used as an altar. She poured the blood into a bowl lined with sea salt and chant ink. Then she waited, heart pounding. The moment the blood touched the mixture, something shifted in the air. The water in the bowl bubbled, hissed. The surface shivered. Naya held her breath, eyes wide, waiting for the glow that signified acceptance. But instead, the color began to darken. The red thinned. The salt began to crack. Then the bowl cracked with it. A sharp, dry sound, unnatural in the presence of water. The blood had been rejected. She stared at the broken offering, her breath caught, her limbs suddenly cold. The mirror in her satchel began to shake, vibrating faintly. She pulled it out and watched in silence as it cracked at the edges, and the sea goddess's voice arrived not in thunder, but in stillness. "You know, the one I asked for." That was all she said. But it was enough. Naya remained kneeling long after the waves had washed the blood away. Her blade lay beside her, untouched by rust, still sharp. Her hands, wet with seawater and failure, trembled. For the first time since leaving her world, she felt fear in its truest form. Not of dying, not of being caught, but of losing the one thing she didn't know she'd been hoping for. The chance to choose something for herself. She avoided him. At first, it was only for a day, then 2, but it quickly stretched into a week. The guilt of what she had done, and what she had failed to do, wrapped itself around her like seaweed, clinging and cold, dragging her further into silence. Ogbonna had noticed, of course. He was many things, but oblivious was not one of them. He had a way of watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, a way of searching her face for the pieces she wasn't saying. She could see the questions rising in his eyes like foam to the surface, but he didn't push, Not right away. Instead, he tried to close the space between them the only way he knew how. Laughter, stories, gentle gestures. One evening, he brought her roasted corn and groundnut wrapped in an old newspaper, handed it to her with a half smile and said, "You've been quiet lately. Corn for your thoughts." She'd smiled weakly, accepted it, but the warmth didn't reach her chest. She wanted to tell him everything. About the sea, about the blood, about the goddess who had marked him as an offering. But how could she say those words out loud and still keep what they had? How could she speak the truth without poisoning every glance they shared? And so she remained silent. Every night she sat near her mirror and whispered apologies that only the wind could hear. The sea did not accept apologies. It never had. It only accepted obedience. And when denied that, it retaliated. Naya could feel it already in her skin, the ache in her joints, the strange burning behind her eyes when she stood too close to mirrors, the way her feet sometimes itched as though scales were trying to return. Her body was a map of disobedience, and the goddess had begun to draw consequences. So she tried again. Another sacrifice. Another stranger. This time, a street boy, quick with insults, hands always dipped in someone else's pocket. She had followed him from a market, watched as he slapped a vendor for refusing to give him change, then slipped through the crowd like a snake. He was easy to lure. He thought she was something to possess, a momentary thrill. He followed her willingly, unaware of what she carried in her bag. The blade was still sharp. It hadn't dulled since the last offering. She murmured the same chants, held the same shell to collect the blood, and walked back to the shore with her arms tight to her chest. The ritual bowl cracked before she even poured. The sea hissed. The mirror in her room trembled violently, glowing with a dull red pulse that hadn't been there before. "You insult the covenant," the goddess whispered. "Do you think we are blind? Do you think we do not feel your fear? This blood is not for us." Naya collapsed beside the altar, her hands shaking. "He is not the only soul," she begged. "There must be another path." But the ocean only receded, leaving her voice unanswered. Ogbonna had begun to follow her. He didn't tell her, but she knew. She could feel it in the shift of wind when she moved, in the faint sound of footsteps a beat too close, in the way his questions grew sharper even when his voice remained soft. "Where do you go at night?" he asked one evening as they sat outside his flat, legs dangling over the edge of the balcony. "You vanish. Then you come back with salt in your hair and a weight in your chest." She didn't answer. She wanted to. She opened her mouth, felt the words rise, but they scattered like fish when the tide came in. "Sometimes I just walk," she replied. He didn't press, but the silence between them grew denser. That same night, he followed her. She felt him long before she saw him. When she reached the edge of the water and turned, he was hiding behind a large rock, barely breathing. She didn't say anything, just stared at the waves. After a while, he came out of hiding. His face was pale, confused. "You talk to the ocean?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. "Like it talks back?" She nodded. "It does." He laughed, uncertain. "You're strange, Naya." A pause. "Beautiful, but strange." She smiled, and it was the saddest smile she had ever worn. She didn't explain. She couldn't. If he knew, he would run, or worse, he would stay and try to save her. And no one could save her. Not from this. That night, the goddess came in full. Not a whisper. Not a shimmer in the mirror. She filled the entire room. The walls became water. The ceiling flickered with stars that didn't belong to the sky. The air was thick with pressure, and the salt in it made Naya fall to her knees instantly. The sea goddess's form was barely visible, just waves in the shape of a woman, eyes like whirlpools, mouth like a storm. "You were chosen," the voice boomed, not in sound but in thought. "You were not sent to love. You were sent to deliver." Naya trembled on the floor, her skin stinging. "I tried. I offered. I bled them. But not him," the goddess snapped, and with that, her back erupted in pain. It felt like hooks dragging through her spine, peeling layers of dignity with each word. "You hold his life above ours. You insult your lineage. You spit on your title." The mirror cracked. Her ankles burned. Her voice choked in her throat. She began, but the pain silenced her. "You were our senior," the goddess continued, tone lowering. "You are now our burden." The room went dark. The pain stopped. But Naya knew what had happened. Her rank was gone. Her power stripped. Her place in the sea vanished. And yet, in the quiet aftermath, she still clutched her chest, not from pain, but from fear. Because even now, broken as she was, she still did not want to kill Ogbonna. He waited for her outside the club. She hadn't gone inside that night, hadn't planned to. Her body ached in strange places, and the pain beneath her skin had begun to crawl, like thousands of tiny fish swimming just beneath the surface. But something had pulled her there anyway, some thread that wouldn't allow her to stay away. And there he was, leaning casually against the concrete wall beside the club's rusted steel door, arms folded, expression soft. In his hand, he held something small. It was an anklet, woven from thread and beads, with tiny seashells stitched into the pattern. She stared at it for a moment, confused, then at him. "I made this," Ogbonna said, shrugging slightly. "It reminded me of you." His voice was light, but there was something in his eyes that didn't match, something quieter, more fragile. She reached out slowly and took the anklet, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent a tremor through her chest. Her voice caught behind her tongue, so she didn't speak. She simply looked down at the gift, holding it like something sacred. "Do you like it?" he asked. She nodded. Still, no words. He smiled anyway and said nothing else. They stood there for a long time, just breathing the same air, and for a brief, fleeting moment, it felt like the world around them had gone still. That night, she couldn't sleep. The anklet rested on the small table beside her mirror, and every time she turned, it caught the moonlight and glowed faintly. It shouldn't have meant so much, not an object, not something this small, but it did. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was thought of. Made with her in mind. By someone who knew nothing of her true self and still saw something worth remembering. Her heart had grown too full, too loud. She pressed her hand over it like she could muffle it from the sea. She stood before the mirror, waiting for it to shimmer, but it remained still. That was worse. When it glowed, when it whispered, she could at least respond. But when it fell silent, she felt the weight of its watchfulness even more. She lowered herself to the floor, knelt in front of it, and for the first time, she didn't beg or plead. She bargained. "Take me back," she said quietly. "I will give you anything. My name. My status. My gifts. I'll become nothing if you ask. But let me keep him." Her voice cracked on the last word, her hands shaking. The mirror rippled faintly. Not enough to respond. Just enough to show it had heard. Then, a gust of air swirled through the room, despite all the windows being closed. The anklet slid from the table and landed at her knees. And the mirror turned dark. "If you will not give his blood," came the voice, slow and deep, "then yours will do." The change didn't happen all at once. It crept in slowly, like how darkness replaces light, not in one strike, but in creeping silence. First, she noticed her reflection in puddles no longer matched the way her body moved. Then, she couldn't feel the tips of her fingers for hours. Her back stung, not from pain, but from absence. The power that once ran through her spine like electricity had gone. She dreamed of the underwater court, of her throne now empty, only to see another princess step into it as the sea spirits bowed. Her name was spoken in past tense. Her image erased from coral walls. Her title stripped. She didn't need the goddess to say it out loud. She had been dethroned. No longer senior. No longer a daughter of power. She was a shadow. A caution. A warning to the others. Still, her heart chose him. Even in disgrace, even in dimmed light, her pulse beat only in his direction. She watched Ogbonna from across streets now, too afraid to be near for long. Her body was becoming fragile. Her feet stumbled more. Her strength weakened. But the ache wasn't only physical. It was soul-deep. The punishment of loving him didn't hurt nearly as much as the thought of what the sea might do next if she continued to resist. She returned to the shore 2 nights later, barefoot, hooded, her mirror glowing violently in her arms. The water had risen higher than usual, even though there'd been no storm. That was how she knew the goddess was listening. Naya stood at the tide's edge and held the mirror to her face. "Why him?" she asked, no longer whispering. "Why him, when I had 1,000 other hands to bleed?" The sea didn't reply in words this time. Instead, a vision filled the mirror's surface, a glimmer of Ogbonna's face, laughing, radiant, then bleeding, lifeless. Her knees gave way. She gripped the mirror so tightly her fingers bled. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "Give me something else to offer. Anything." The voice that responded was neither cruel nor kind. It was simply final. "One moon remains. Fail us again, and your soul will belong to neither shore." The air grew cold. The waves receded. And the mirror darkened. She remained there, kneeling, hands trembling. The sand clung to her skin like judgment. She didn't cry. She couldn't. The sea had taken her tears long ago. She rose slowly, each movement feeling heavier than the last, and walked away with no plan. No solution. Only the knowledge that time, her final tide, was coming. She lay still beside him, her back to his chest, eyes open in the dark. The room was quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against the walls, making every creak of the floor or distant whisper of the sea sound louder than it should. Ogbonna slept soundly, one arm draped over her waist, his breathing slow and even, unaware of how quickly time was unraveling. She had counted every moment since the mirror last spoke. The moon cycle was nearly complete. The sea goddess had not returned in words or wind, not since her final warning, but that silence was not mercy. It was the sound of fate settling into place. Naya shifted slightly, the anklet around her ankle brushing against the sheet. She looked down at it, at the delicate seashells glinting faintly in the faint streetlight that filtered through the curtain. It was the only thing left that still made her feel whole. A gift, a symbol of something real, something soft and human. She could feel her power continuing to slip. Her skin no longer shimmered. Her fingers ached when she tried to chant. Even her breath came with effort now, like her lungs were drawing in a world that didn't want her anymore. And yet, beside her, Ogbonna radiated warmth, his presence grounding her like an anchor. It was cruel, how calm he looked. How peaceful. How unaware. She turned her head slightly, just enough to watch his face. His features, usually alive with movement, were now quiet, vulnerable. She memorized the curve of his lips, the lashes against his cheek, the small scar near his left brow. She studied him like she was etching his soul into hers. She had no idea how much longer she had left. In the morning, he surprised her with music. A small speaker by the window played low jazz rhythms, something he had called Lagos Sunday Sounds. The beat was lazy, the kind that begged you not to rush anything. He danced for her, barefoot, in nothing but shorts, moving like water across the floor. Naya sat on the bed, smiling quietly, her chin resting on her knees. She didn't join him. She couldn't, not with how heavy her legs had become, but she watched him with aching tenderness. Every movement he made was a reminder of what she would lose. "Come on," he teased, reaching for her hand. "Just a few steps." She shook her head, laughing softly. "I'm not as graceful as you think." "That's fine," he said, kneeling in front of her. "Clumsy girls make better memories." She placed her hand in his, and he helped her stand, guiding her gently into a slow sway. They barely moved, a side-to-side rhythm, more leaning than dancing, but it felt like enough. For a moment, she allowed herself to pretend that she was just a girl, that he was just a boy, that love wasn't a sentence and the sea wasn't listening. He rested his forehead against hers. "You're fading," he whispered. Her breath caught. "I can feel it. You're dimmer." She looked down. "Maybe I'm just tired." "Naya," he said gently, "please don't lie to me." She closed her eyes. "Then don't ask me questions I can't answer." He didn't press again. They just stood there, swaying, their silence more intimate than any confession could be. That afternoon, they walked through the market together. The sun was gentle, tucked behind a quilt of pale clouds, and the street vendors were lazily shouting their prices without conviction. Ogbonna held her hand the entire time, his thumb brushing against her knuckles as if reminding her that she was still here. She let herself enjoy it, the chaos of the market, the scent of fried plantain, the random laughter of children darting between stalls. It felt like a life that could have been hers. A life of routines, of touches, of shared glances across plastic tables. He bought her a mango, cut it open with a borrowed knife, and held it to her mouth. She took a bite, juice running down her chin, and he laughed, wiping it with his shirt. "I'll remember this," he said quietly. "You talk like I'm leaving tomorrow," she teased, though her smile was tight. "I don't know when," he replied. "But something in me keeps saying, soon." Her hand gripped his tighter. "Then let's pretend it's forever. Just for today." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Okay. Just today." They wandered the market for hours, touching everything, tasting everything, laughing louder than they should have. She let herself be human. She let herself forget, for as long as she could. That night, he made her dinner, poorly seasoned noodles with over-fried eggs, and called it a farewell feast to sadness. She ate every bite, even though her stomach barely accepted food these days. When they curled into bed again, he held her like he was trying to memorize her shape. "Tell me one thing," he murmured. "Anything." "If you weren't a dancer," she asked, "what would you have been?" He smiled. "A dreamer. But that's cheating, isn't it?" She chuckled softly. "Maybe." "Okay. You then," he said, brushing hair from her face. "What would you have been, if you hadn't been this version of you?" She stared at the ceiling, her throat tightening. "A bird," she whispered. "So I could fly away without guilt." He pulled her closer, resting his chin on her head. I don't want you to fly away. Then don't let go, she said, though her voice cracked at the end. Later, after he'd fallen asleep, she stood by the window, watching the moon shift through clouds. The sea in the distance was quiet, too quiet. She held the anklet in her hand, rubbing her thumb across the shells. I don't know how to love him and live, she said to the wind. The mirror on the dresser flickered faintly, then went dark again. There were no more warnings. Only the echo of her own breath, growing thinner by the hour. She stood by the water long before the moon reached its peak. The tide had receded slightly, revealing a strip of damp sand beneath her feet that clung like second skin. She carried the tools in silence, the coral blade wrapped in soft cloth, the salt-soaked shell bowl, the mirror that pulsed faintly even without her touch. She didn't chant. She didn't call out to the sea. She only moved, slowly, deliberately, as if her body was on its own kind of ritual, one not rooted in duty anymore, but despair. Each step felt heavier than the last, her muscles straining under the weight of what she knew was coming. There was no longer any illusion left. No more bargaining. No more pretending. The sea goddess had made it clear. There was only one offering the ocean would accept. She had exhausted all her tricks, all her defiance, all her hope. Ogbonna was the one. And the moment she admitted that, the ritual became something crueler than duty. It became a choice. And that was what terrified her most. Because now it wasn't just obedience. It wasn't even love. It was survival. And every time she looked at him, at the way he smiled like the world hadn't bruised him, at the way his laughter filled the cracks in her soul, she knew that choosing herself meant destroying something good. Something pure. The only real thing she had touched since leaving the sea. She didn't hear him approach. The sand muffled his steps, and the wind carried away the sound of his breathing. But when she turned, he was there, standing a few feet away, arms crossed, his silhouette framed by the distant city lights. She froze, the bowl still in her hand, the blade buried in the sand by her feet. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The waves filled the space between them like a third presence. I knew you'd be here, he said, voice low. I just didn't think I'd see this. She didn't respond. Her lips parted slightly, as if a word had begun to form, but she closed them again. Ogbonna took a step closer, his eyes scanning the scene. The bowl, the mirror, the faint shimmer around her that even now made her look otherworldly. Is this some kind of religion? He asked, trying to steady his voice. Is that what this is? She looked at him then, and her eyes were full. Not of tears, those had long dried, but of sorrow so deep it hollowed out everything inside her. No, she whispered. It's not religion. It's older than that. He shook his head slowly, frustration leaking into his features. Then what is it? Because I've followed you, Naya. I've watched you chant to waves, disappear into the night, bleed from nowhere. And every time I ask, you change the subject. Every time I try to hold on to you, you pull further away. She dropped her gaze. Because I wasn't meant to be held. He walked closer now, his steps firmer, emotion rising. Then tell me. Right now. I deserve that. After everything. Tell me who you are. She turned to him fully, and the moonlight caught her face. Tired, pale, lined with invisible cracks. I'm not who you think I am, she said. I wasn't born here. I wasn't even born to stay. Her voice trembled, but she kept going. I'm from beneath. From a place your people pray near but never truly see. The Red Sea isn't just water, Ogbonna. It's a world. A kingdom. And I was its daughter. He stared at her, stunned, as if her words were smoke he couldn't quite catch. "What are you saying?" he whispered. She took a step forward. "I came here to offer a soul. A sacred one. The sea demanded it to restore balance. That was my task. I was sent to find the right blood." His expression changed slowly, horror blooming in his eyes like ink in water. "You came to kill someone?" She nodded once. "Yes. But not just anyone. Someone worthy. Someone with light. Someone the sea would accept. And she paused, swallowing hard. "I didn't expect to find you." He took a step back, as if her confession had physically struck him. His face contorted, disbelief, betrayal, grief. "So you chose me," he said. "All this time, every moment we spent. You were leading me to death." "No," she said quickly, her voice sharp with panic. "I was supposed to. But I didn't. I couldn't." She reached for him instinctively, but he pulled away. "Every person I tried to offer, the sea rejected. Because it wanted you. But I chose differently. I chose to disobey." "Then why didn't you leave?" he asked, nearly shouting now. "Why stay if you couldn't give them what they wanted?" "Because I loved you," she said. The words landed like thunder between them. She hadn't said it before. Not to him, not aloud. But now that it was out, it hung in the air, fragile and irreversible. "I loved you more than the throne, more than the sea, more than survival. And I still do. That's why I'm dying, Ogbonna. The sea is killing me for choosing you." He stared at her, breathing heavily, torn between the instinct to run and the need to understand. "And what happens now?" he asked. She closed her eyes. "If I don't give you to them, I'll disappear. My soul will drift. Not in death, not in life. I'll be forgotten. Unseen." The silence that followed was suffocating. "Finally," he whispered, "then maybe I should have never met you." Her body flinched, but she didn't argue. She just watched as he turned and walked away, each step pulling a piece of her heart into the dark. The sea was waiting. Not with rage. Not even with impatience. It was simply still. As though the tide itself understood that the final moment had arrived, and there was no need for noise. Silence was enough. Naya stood on the shore barefoot, the cold sand gripping her toes like fingers from beneath. The wind didn't scream. It whispered. And in its whisper was the voice of the sea goddess. Not loud, not angry, just present. Watching. Expecting. The mirror didn't glow that night. It rested on the sand beside the bowl and the blade, as if even it knew that nothing else needed to be said. There was no more bargaining. No more pretending. Tonight, she had only two choices. Do what was demanded. Or vanish into nothing. Not death. Not even exile. Just erasure. A drifting spirit caught between two worlds, welcomed by neither. She returned to the house just past midnight. The door creaked quietly as she entered, and for a brief moment, she wondered if he would be awake. But when she stepped into the room, she found him curled on the bed, asleep, the blanket only half covering his chest. The anklet she had given back to him days ago now rested on his wrist, looped twice around as if he couldn't bear to let it go completely. She stood there for a while, just watching him breathe. There was no peace in her tonight, only memory. Memory of how he laughed when he danced, how his voice lowered when he was scared, how his hands always knew the right way to hold her when words failed. When she was sure he was deep in sleep. She didn't dress. She didn't pack. She simply lifted her mirror, the blade, and the shell bowl, and walked barefoot into the night. The moonlight guided her path as if the world had conspired to light her way. Back at the water's edge, she didn't hesitate. The ritual didn't require struggle. The sea didn't want agony. Only blood. Only truth. She knelt on the sand, her hands trembling now, not from fear, but from grief that had lived too long in her bones. The mirror remained dark, but the air thickened, as if the sea goddess had leaned forward, closer. She drew the blade. It was lighter than she remembered. Or maybe she had grown too weak to feel its weight properly. She whispered his name. Once. Just once. And even though he didn't hear it, she felt it settle in the wind. She placed the blade against her own palm first, slicing gently. The shell bowl welcomed her blood with a quiet glow. Then she stood, turned, and walked back into the house one final time. Naya moved through the final act with silence, not rage. She kissed Ogbonna's forehead, whispered an apology, and offered his blood to the sea with trembling hands. The blade moved gently, the bowl filled slowly, and the ritual completed with a flash of ancient power. Her ring dissolved into ash. The sea had accepted the sacrifice. But it did not celebrate. It only sighed, not with joy, but with grief. Beneath the waves, Nkoli stood once more in the great underwater hall, her skin dulled, her presence hollow. The other sea princesses watched from a distance, whispering like mourners. The sea goddess spoke, not with warmth, but with judgment. You have done what was asked. But you are no longer ours. There was no glory in obedience. Only the knowledge that in choosing love, in breaking her covenant, she hadn't won anything. She had simply lost her name, her place, her light, and worst of all him. After Ogbonna's death, the sea grew restless and cold. Rituals failed, visions blurred, and the sacred salt no longer burned true. The Red Sea dimmed, haunted by a sacrifice that soured in sorrow. Whispers spread. Some claimed Ogbonna's soul was too pure, others blamed Nkoli's love, saying her heart had tainted the offering. Though she fulfilled the ritual, her soul had not consented. The sea goddess withdrew into the deepest trench, unreachable. Nkoli wandered the ocean floor in silence, stripped of voice, title, and light. She begged not for redemption, but for remembrance, to leave a shell at Ogbonna's grave, to touch the world they once shared. But the sea denied her even grief. Your love was rebellion. Let it be your cage. Cast into the shadow depth, a realm beneath realms where light and name dissolve, Nkoli drifted alone, her glow dimmed to ghostlight, her voice lost to the silence she had earned by loving too much. The sea erased her name from scrolls and memory. New princesses rose, obedient and uncurious. But the tides still remembered. And sometimes, on still nights near the surface, a song could be heard, not loud, not mournful, just lost. A wordless melody that rose with the waves and drifted into wind. They say if you listen closely at midnight along the Red Sea, you'll hear it. The voice of a woman who once loved a dancer. A voice caught between a heart that broke and a sea that never forgave. Some say she sings to Ogbonna's grave. Others believe she waits, for the day the ocean softens, for the day love is enough. But most agree, the sea forgets nothing. And grief, sung too long, becomes silence. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe to Triple C Stories. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section and stay tuned for more exciting stories.